on fruit.
Hey everyone, I'm going to talk about the response, not everyone wants to be a farmer, and why it's bullshit. So everyone has those annoying vegan friends who are like all into it, and then they decide they want to be raw vegan, and like they're all into that, and then they decide they want to be fruitarians. And that's when they really get crazy, because then they get this insane idea, well some of them do, that in order to save the world and solve all the problems like using fossil fuels, overconsumption of resources, lots of starving people, lots of wars and governments controlling everybody, and all these horrible, horrible problems that are causing so much suffering in the people and the animals, and clear-cutting of the rainforest and all that. They think the solution is for everybody to move down to the tropics and the subtropics, form intentional communities, and villages, and build eco-friendly houses like bamboo and earth strips and tiny houses and solar panels, and and of course everyone's going to be producing their food via permaculture fruit forests, like they've been doing in Southeast Asia in some areas, because there's 1,000-year-old permaculture fruit forests there. Yeah, so they have this crazy idea, and they try to convert everybody, and the response they get a lot is, even from their fellow fruitarians, is something along the lines of, not everyone wants to be a farmer, right? The world still needs doctors and lawyers and artists and painters and plumbers and electricians and builders and architects and teachers and pediatricians. You get the idea, right? So it's this idea of a specialized career, right? Which is fine. You can have a specialized career. Of course, you have choice. You can do whatever you want to do, right? But sorry, you got to be a farmer. There's no way around that. Well, there is actually. You do have a choice to not be a farmer, right? To not have a hand in growing your own food. But I'm going to attempt to explain why that's a really stupid idea, or rather why it's a really ineffective strategy, and it won't get you where you want to go. All right. So the idea that specialized occupations include a farmer, in other words, farming is its own occupation that you can choose to be or not to be, didn't really exist until about 12,000 years ago. That's when the modern nation state was invented, right? In other words, that's when grain agriculture, rather wide-scale industrial grain agriculture was invented, and along with animal husbandry and some other things, first came into widespread use then, right? So, of course, there was a tribe in Africa that was eating grains 320,000 years ago. But we're talking about widespread industrial grain agriculture. And basically what that means is there was one farmer with a giant hundreds of acres field, monocropped, with one kind of grain, right? And then there's a shoemaker. And the shoemaker makes shoes and sells them for money, and uses the money to buy grain from the farmer, right? The problem is that system of specialized agriculture takes food growing, something that's very important to our well-being, out of our hands, out of your individual hands, and puts it in the hand of other people, and that makes it much easier for governments to control people, right, and do all sorts of horrible things. Like right now the government is subsidizing factory farms, right? So when you pay your taxes, right, sure you're paying for schools and roads, but you're also paying for what happens in factory farms. You personally are paying for that, right? So grow your own food, it's an easy way to kind of fight back against that system. Now, when somebody is talking about, we should all move to the tropics and grow our own food, that doesn't mean you have to be a farmer. It just means grow your own food. It's not hard. It doesn't take a lot of work if you're doing it permaculture style. You may have this image of people spending hours weeding in the garden and throwing in soil amendments and tilling and doing all this stuff. Not really. Once you have a permaculture fruit forest established, it's not really a lot of work. There's some tending to do and some harvesting and things like that, but you can still be a doctor or a lawyer if you want to be a doctor or a lawyer. Or, you can be a painter. You can be a midwife. You could be a bowl maker. You can make really awesome clay pots. You could be a specialist in Adobe house building, and you'll still be growing your own food, right? So the not everyone wants to be a farmer rebuttal is basically bullshit, right? There's not always a nice way to say things. When you think about the historical context of not everyone wants to be a farmer, because not everyone wants to be a farmer, sort of made possible a lot of the horrible things that are happening today. So be a farmer, and be whatever else you want to be too. Just think of farming like breathing or drinking water, right? You wouldn't say not everyone wants to be a breather, right? The world needs doctors and lawyers too. Well, try to be a doctor and a lawyer without breathing, right? Or like eating, not everyone wants to be an eater. Not everyone wants to be a mover. Try to be stationary for the rest of your life and see what happens, right? Try to not be a farmer and see what happens. This is what's happening, right? This is what's happening. This is sheetrock made of some terribly nasty stuff, painted with some paint that has chemicals that's going to be off-gassing for the next 10 years, right? Even I don't even have to look further than a foot from my head to see an example of a lot of the horrible things that are wrong with the world. The factory that this was made in, right, put off all kinds of pollution that killed all kinds of marine wildlife. You don't have to look far. You just have to look and accept it, and then look at what you can do to change it. And that means planting lots of fruit trees and not whining about how not everyone wants to be a farmer, the world needs this and that. It's okay. The world doesn't need breathers either, and the world doesn't need eaters and talkers and movers or any of that important stuff. You can just be a shoemaker if you want. Yeah. More of the story? Plant fruit trees.
Your brain on fruit.